In Section 1, we looked at the symbolic meaning of the first fundamental esoteric religious symbol, the circle, and discovered that it intends to define a world, that is, any world that can be considered complete in itself. The world of God is where we started from. It includes the totality of all existence, psychical and material, in its apparent endlessness. Filling this world are the three forces, principles, or qualities of God, represented by the triangle, the second fundamental symbol. And within that world we find the material world, which is sometimes shown as another circle, but sometimes a circle is squared to illustrate the properties of the material world. The square is the third fundamental symbol, and we can go a very long way in our exploration of esoteric religious symbolism if only we have some depth of understanding of what these three symbols refer to. Authentic esoteric religious symbolism and systems are based on a common ideological language. The circle, triad, and tetrad are the ABC of this language, and departures from this language indicate lack of knowledge, lack of understanding, invention, imagination, and contrivance. Anyone who spends some time exploring contemporary New Age literature, the spiritual claims and monologues of self-appointed gurus, and the various spiritual systems and typologies of the modern world will have encountered this. So how can we discern invention from legitimate knowledge in this sphere? Well, first we must learn the ABC of this new language, so that we have a sound foundation to build on and to measure things by. Then we will quickly find those systems and esoteric religious ideologies that know this language, and those that do not. The best place to begin is probably the Tetragrammaton of Jewish mysticism. Although fleshed-out descriptions of this body of knowledge did not appear in the public forum until sometime after the Middle Ages, there are reasons to expect that it is many thousands of years old, not least because traditionally Jewish knowledge is very closely guarded. The gatekeepers of this sphere of knowledge have long regarded it as a form of material wealth, and so it is not simply given away to anyone. The Tetragrammaton refers to the four-part name of God in Hebrew, but since there are no vowels in the Hebrew alphabet, the name Jehovah appears in this form in Jewish script, or the letters YHWH or YHVH in Anglicized literature from time to time. From here on I will use the letters YHVH, as it was the first form I encountered, and even though it's not strictly correct, I'm accustomed to using it. Similarly, I pronounce these letters Yod-He, Thou-He by habit, even though strictly speaking they are pronounced Yod-He, Wa-He. I hope you can live with it. These letters lend themselves to carrying the idea of a four-part God, as well as the four characteristics of the material world. And the Tetragrammaton process, which we will get to shortly, does this in a very interesting and illuminating way. So let's begin with the Tetragrammaton. If we remember from Section 1, the first three letters refer to the active, opposing, and neutralizing forces, aspects, or qualities of God, which, needless to say, are not material. The fourth aspect of God is creation itself, and since the graphic we began with carries the idea that the three forces of God fill the totality of all that there is, an idea which we find even in Orthodox Christian literature, it is quite reasonable to accept creation itself, that is, the material world, as an aspect of God. So the first three letters refer to the triad of immaterial forces, and the final fourth aspect, creation itself, is indicated with the second He. The material world itself has four corresponding and roughly analogous characteristics. Two are psychical and two are physical. The two aspects of the material world are uncontroversial: matter and motion of matter, or in reference to the human being, the body and spatial movement. The two psychical aspects are uncontroversial in reference to the human being, mental and emotional functions. Implicit in this description of the material world is the idea that everything is conscious, although clearly not in the same way we are. You can often find this idea in the worldview of so-called primitive cultures and sometimes in esoteric religious literature, but not, of course, in the world of modern science, which unsurprisingly regards it as superstition or fantasy. Unfortunately, the instruments of science do not lend themselves to investigating our own form of consciousness, let alone other potential forms. We cannot say, as mentioned in the previous section, whether consciousness is primary or a secondary manifestation of the brain. Even defining it in ourselves is problematic, and we cannot expect this to change anytime soon. In the meantime, we can note the principle, which is inconsequential to our own self-knowledge, and move on. If we compare the four characteristic divisions of God made in Jewish mysticism and those in ourselves, we notice that they are roughly analogous, and this is one reason for the confusion between the forces and the conductors of forces. The active force is analogous to movement and designated as male. The passive force is analogous to emotion and designated female. The deciding or neutralizing force is analogous to the intellectual mind and is regarded as hermaphroditic, while the material world is analogous to the body. Now let's consider the Tetragrammaton process, which explains the rest of the confusion as to whether we should consider man and God as a triad or a tetrad. In the Tetragrammaton process, the second he never appears on its own. It is always co-joined with yod as it progresses to form a new triad. We can contemplate this in a number of useful ways. In the first triad, which denotes the tripartite Godhead, the active force is without substance. In the second triad, which has four components, the new active force is materiality. If we consider matter alongside the human body, we realize that movement is an intrinsic characteristic of the body, and that all physical life as we know it has the inherent capacity for movement. Motion is also an intrinsic property of matter, so the two are co-joined physical attributes, and this is perfectly indicated in the Tetragrammaton process of Jewish mysticism. At the same time, the flesh and bones of our legs are characteristically different things than running, walking, or jumping, so they can be considered separately or as mutually dependent characteristics. So from the outset we note that the Tetragrammaton and its process illustrates the divisions of the world of the individual as we currently understand them, and we need not appeal to faith or mere belief in order to proceed. In order to further ground these ideas and establish facts we know about ourselves and life on Earth, let's return to the subject of evolution. When the simplest unicellular life appeared on Earth, it was already capable of movement. This capacity for movement was inborn and instinctive, that is, it required no brain or central nervous system to guide it. Spatial movement was, from the beginning, a property of the simplest unicellular body. When our own lineage of life emerged in the form of simple chordate fish some 520 million years ago, a primitive brain and nervous system took charge of the instinctive functions, while a small bulb on these earliest brains controlled spatial movement. As time passed and competitive pressures increased, movements needed to become more varied, much more precise and faster, and so this small bulb increased in complexity and size to eventually form what we know today as the cerebellum. So the instinctive brain and the cerebellum formed the earliest brains, and this model was so successful that no further development was necessary for hundreds of millions of years. Insects, amphibians, fish and reptiles used and still use this brain plan today. It was not until the age of mammals that this brain plan changed, again due to evolutionary pressures, and the limbic system was added. The limbic system added emotional capability, establishing strong bonds between creatures and their offspring, between family groups and clans. Dogs, cats, bears, sheep, cows, and those animals regarded as belonging to a higher order used and still use this plan today. Finally, the neocortex, which means new bark, developed in higher order animals and is most developed in modern human beings. The neocortex is the centre of our rational mind, our ability to intellectually evaluate and calculate, to ponder the cosmos and the meaning and purpose of life. So the Tetragrammaton precisely defines the 4 characteristic functions of the human being, including everything we are on a fundamental level and everything we are capable of, while a Tetragrammaton process precisely defines the evolutionary order of development of the brain that we retain today. The final thing to consider before we embark on our voyage of discovery is that the Tetragrammaton process provides us with a system of numbering, or rather, provides associative meaning to number as new triads evolve as a continuum. By applying theosophical addition as we consider this numbering, we arrive at 3 divisions of number and associative meaning. The numbers 1, 4 and 7 refer to the physical realm. The numbers 2, 5 and 8 refer to the emotional realm. And the numbers 3, 6 and 9 refer to the intellectual or mental realm. Once again, we can use this knowledge to evaluate the many systems and ideologies which claim esoteric origins and decide for ourselves which of these are connected to esoteric knowledge, those which may have been originally connected, and those which are purely the products of invention, imagination, or intentional charlatans. Number is a fascinating field of exploration, and with the help of theosophical addition, which has been used for thousands of years as a part of this esoteric language, though this is scarcely realised, we can go down many rabbit holes and discover very interesting things. After I've put down all that I need to, we might explore some of these rabbit holes separately at a later date. From here on, having addressed the rudimentary aspects of the language of esoteric religious knowledge, we can begin to read some simple religious symbols and systems. We will begin that journey in the next video. Thanks for listening.